It's my pleasure indeed to introduce our keynote speaker, Eva Goldborn. Eva is Associate Director, Programs Communication for ReFed, where she leads strategic communications, stakeholder engagement, and fundraising activities. ReFed developed the first ever national baseline study of where food is wasted in the U.S. that includes an economic analysis of the 27 of the most cost-effective and scalable solutions to reduce food waste. We're excited to have Eva here to share her thoughts with us, and I ask you to give a warm welcome to Eva as she joins us.
So a little bit about ReFed. We're a nonprofit collaboration about 2 years old now that started as really under this idea of bringing together these different foundations, nonprofits, city governments, and businesses who are really committed to reducing food waste. And in 2016, almost a year ago, we launched the Roadmap to Reduce U.S. Food Waste by 20%, which was the first national economic baseline study of where food is wasted, but we took it a step further to really identify the economic analysis of a set of solutions. So identifying the problem, the solutions, and then how much it would cost to actually implement them, and then who are the players that needed to be around the table. In 2017 and beyond, we're really focused on actually taking the roadmap one step further with some very specific stakeholder-specific action guides and tools that I'll mention along the way today, because the roadmap covers 11 different stakeholders, but you as a manufacturer, or you as a retailer, or you as a different type of food business, or even an international organization have a different way and a different set of solutions that you're thinking about this. So we wanted to dedicate some of that thinking at the stakeholder level. Kai really teed us up perfectly in terms of talking about a little bit about the problem of food waste at the global level. And I'm going to dial us into the US context, which I think is very relevant in the Canadian context, given Canada is slightly smaller in terms of population size, but our relationship with food, our relationship with food waste, I think is quite comparable. In the US, based on our roadmap, we found that every year American consumers, businesses, and farms spend $218 billion on food that is never eaten. And Jonathan mentioned to us before, $31 billion here in Canada, wasting natural resources and emitting harmful greenhouse gas emissions. This waste represents about 20% of our valuable cropland, fertilizer, fresh water, and is responsible for about 5% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So as we think about our motivations for this problem, $218 billion in the US, that's a little over 1% of our GDP on basically managing trash, is just a horrid and phenomenal number, and something that is very accessible and very solvable. In our research, we found also nearly 85% of all food waste happens at the consumer-facing, in homes or at the consumer-facing business level. So that's your grocery stores, that's our restaurants, institutional cafeterias, like in hospitals or schools. And this really represents, in terms of where we're actually going to approach solutions, is a huge opportunity to engage our consumers and our consumer-facing businesses. You can see too, we have it broken down along the supply chain, 10 million left on farms, which we think is actually really conservative. So for those of you who are manufacturers working directly with farms, a major opportunity for food recovery, for food donation on farms from beautiful fresh produce that is tilled under. Again, if you are a manufacturer, you're actually doing better than most. We calculated 1 million tons in wasted food. This largely, and the question about mozzarella was a great example of why there's less waste, more controlled, and the ability to actually capture, maybe at a lower economic value, but for animal feed or anaerobic digestion or simply just a new product. And then our 40%, 43% at our consumer-facing business and homes. And what I think is interesting too, we have the value of this waste, $144 billion at the consumer level. Astronomical number if we think about it. And of course, the reason for this high number is because of the retail value that we're purchasing our food at. Okay, so enough about the problem. We're here to talk about the solutions. So in the ReFed roadmap, again, we identified 27 of the most cost-effective and scalable solutions. There's obviously many more than 27 solutions. I learned maybe the 28th is to have a teenage son. So we might consider adding that to ReFed Roadmap 2.0. But we had a criteria for selection, again, available data, cost-effective, scalable, and feasible. So if you're interested in learning more about some of the additional solutions, they are in our technical appendix on our website. But just very quickly, and again, Kai teed us up very well for this because this matches the EPA food recovery hierarchy. So we have our prevention solutions, which are most cost-effective and provide the highest economic value at $7.7 billion. And for our prevention solutions, because we're capturing food at its highest retail value, this is really the place to start in terms of capturing that. Our recovery solutions are our best opportunity, of course, to alleviate hunger. I'm sorry, I have a typo here. The meals recovered, it's actually 1.8 billion meals, are actually doubling the amount of meals available to those food insecure in the United States. And then finally, our recycling solutions have the highest, so 9.5 million tons in these solutions. And I'll go into a few more of these in a moment, but just to give you a sense of where they're bucketed, because I think this relates to other solutions we'll hear about today. Packaging, product, and portions. So simple things like packaging adjustments or smaller plates. Operational and supply chain efficiency. We're going to hear from Andrew Shackman on waste tracking and analytics, and then things like inventory management and manufacturing line optimization, and then consumer education, which we felt like needed its own bucket. And then on the recovery side, donation infrastructure, so things like technologies to help match you to, as a donor, to recipient organizations quickly and safely, transportation, value-added processing to make things more shelf-stable, and then on the policy side. And then I'll get into recycling more in a second, but these three buckets of energy and digestate, on-site processing solutions, and then our agricultural products. So a little bit more on the prevention side. This was surprising to me. Largest net environmental benefit is found in prevention solutions because we're avoiding wasted resources in agriculture altogether. So that water, that soil, that cattle, whatever it might be, which yields a 7x greenhouse gas emission impact per ton of reduced compared to recycling. So our recycling solutions divert more, but our prevention solutions not only are more cost effective, but allow us to have a higher environmental impact. These solutions tend to be capital light, so it might just be investing in a lean path or helping to change behaviors. It might be a marketing campaign to engage your consumers. So some of these more approachable in terms of the implementation. And one thing I'll mention too in terms of new tools is we've developed an innovator database that I'll talk a little bit more soon that's launching next week. And we found that in our innovator database of food waste innovators, about 44% of them are focused on prevention. So a positive indicator that there's a lot of momentum on the prevention side. Major barriers to scale implementation, I think this is an important one for manufacturers. Lack of social license. You do not feel comfortable, compelled, or secure to make a different decision about your food products in a way that helps to solve this problem, with fear that your consumers will, not like that you've limited something, made it smaller. But if there's ways to help tell the story to consumers that you're actually trying to solve this problem, then there's a huge opportunity there. Then information gaps and organizational silos. I don't know any company that actually has a dedicated food waste department. And similar to what Kai was mentioning about the cost of food waste sort of tucked into operational budgets causes some disconnects in sort of actually implementing solutions. And then misalignment of cost and benefit, and standardized date labeling that I have listed here is a great example of this. You as a manufacturer might develop a standard language that goes on your product to help reduce consumer confusion, but it's you and I as the consumer down the line that actually benefit because we ultimately stop wasting food and money over being confused about whether we should chuck that jar of salsa or keep it in the fridge. And then I also just have imperfect produce up here as well. Again, sounded like something within the WRI business case discussion, a very simple solution to integrate imperfect produce into the food products that you're developing. On the recovery side, again, by reducing U.S. food waste by 20%, this doubles the amount of meals recovered for those in need. And we found that nearly half of this new recovery potential comes from farms and packing houses. So again, for those of you who are have access to farms directly, distribution centers, major opportunity for developing gleaning networks and supporting farmers to get this food to those in need if it's not at market value. And from our database, nearly a quarter of our innovators are focused on food recovery. And one specific solution that we're seeing is donation matching software is a really powerful opportunity to help, again, quickly and safely get food from a retailer or even another food business site, even if it's only 20 pounds of food or if it's 200 pounds of food, getting it to those in need. Major barriers to this, liability concerns and fragmented regulation. I think this is the same in the US and in Canada in terms of how these things are regulated. And actually, one of the other tools that we're launching next week is a policy finder, so that at the state and federal level in the United States, you can start to see how unbelievably convoluted these laws are around liability protection to hopefully for all of us to be able to advocate for clearer policy around these issues. And then logistics and infrastructure to process and transport this food is another barrier. A lot of tax incentives for donation are capture the potential profit of that food product, but you also have to pay for the refrigeration of that extra food for longer. You have to pay your truck driver to take it to your local food recovery organization, so there's costs involved. On the recycling side, again, nearly 3/4 of the diversion potential that we identified in the roadmap is from recycling solutions. The three main recycling products are compost, biogas, recapturing the methane, and animal feed. And we found that there's sort of three top levers to scale recycling solutions because they are not cost effective. And this is to increase landfill disposal costs, so discourage the use of landfills to promote the use of organics recycling, and then more efficiencies in hauling and collection through siting closer to urban areas. And I think, again, relevant in the Canadian context too of how you're actually managing your city waste, knowing that that's the higher populations of food and in turn that organic material. And then related to that, denser routes to actually optimize on hauling the organics. In terms of major barriers to scale, cost of disposal, I think that one's fairly obvious. High transportation and logistics costs related to that. Quantity and quality of material supply. So actually, if you do have a centralized composting site or an anaerobic digestion site, that you actually are getting high quality and consistent. And then access to financing. So these anaerobic digesters, they're expensive, the return on investment can be quite a few years. And so again, for those of you, if we're thinking about multi-stakeholder partnership, for those of you who have partnerships at the city level or the provincial level, thinking about where are those grant opportunities to help promote these anaerobic digestion and composting facilities. And then I just have our three most scalable solutions listed here as well. Anaerobic digestion, centralized composting, and water resource recovery. facilities so wastewater treatment plants. So what does this all mean? We wanted to actually show in a visual way the cost effectiveness of all of this compared to diversion potential. So here you have the crown jewel of the REFED roadmap, the marginal food waste abatement cost curve. It was inspired by a McKinsey cost curve for the energy sector to identify some of the cost-effective solutions on the energy side, and we used it as inspiration for ours. So what you can, I won't go into full detail here, but just so that you can orient yourself to this, each of the bars represents one of the 27 solutions. And then along the x-axis, we have our diversion potential. So when you invest in this, what's the capacity for you to divert from landfill? And then along the y-axis, the economic value per ton. And what we can quickly see from this is sort of, in summary of what I was mentioning, all of our prevention solutions are on the far left, which means that they're our most cost effective. And even though our poor recycling solutions might not be as cost effective, they divert the most from landfill. So if we think about moving forward with investment and partnership, technology innovations, ideally this graph actually, the tall ones start to get fatter, and our recycling solutions that are just barely at the x-axis actually get higher, meaning that they become more cost effective. And I'd actually be interested to see what a Canadian version of this would look like in case it's different. So how much does this cost, and what does this mean on the investment side? We found that an $18 billion investment in these 27 solutions that I listed would reduce US food waste by 20% and would yield $100 billion in societal economic value, so value to business, consumers, taxpayers, government, over the next decade. 10-to-1 investment. I'm not a businesswoman, thank God, but those sound like some good numbers to me. So again, as we're thinking about the business case and why there's a reason to do this, those numbers look awesome to me. In terms of benefits per year, in addition to that 100 billion, because food waste is the set of solutions that keeps on giving, again, doubling the amount of meals recovered, so 1.8 billion meals. Then on the environmental side, 1.6 trillion gallons of water, and 18 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And then on the business side, 2 billion in business profit potential. And then for the consumers that you engage with, and even us as consumers in general, 6 billion in consumer cost savings from implementing these solutions. So we have a lot to gain from focusing on solutions in this area. I wanted to just focus on this one too for a second. This was the 2 billion that I just mentioned in business profit potential. And you can see some of the solutions listed here. This relates to after you've invested as a private sector player in this solution, after sort of the cost of implementation, what the benefits are. You can quickly see, again, huge opportunities on our prevention solutions. Just about half of that business profit potential is sitting with waste tracking and analytics, which we'll, again, hear more about from Andrew. Major opportunities. So what does this mean? Nearly 80% of our business profit potential sits with restaurants and food service. So for those of you who are in food service or distribute to food service, this is a major, major opportunity and a compelling business case. And then we have other simple solutions along the prevention line as well, like smaller plates and produce specifications that I mentioned before. So looking ahead, just quickly want to mention beyond these 27 solutions, we have 4 overarching levers for action, which again, I think are very relevant in the Canadian context as well. Common sense policy, financing, which includes philanthropic, government, project, and corporate financing, innovation, that I'll talk quickly more about in just a minute, and then education for both employees in the food service space and restaurants and manufacturing, and our consumers as well. And just quickly, since I'm very excited, we are launching our innovator database next week. I wanted to share this with you. It is a living, breathing compilation, as comprehensive as we could have made it. I think we're up to 400 innovators now, both in the United States, Canada, global, focused on this issue. And you can see new products that are being developed, new business models, different types of solutions. We're highlighting different partnerships. And you can sort and search these in all sorts of different ways. So I'll have to triangulate with the provision team actually to make sure that I have all the innovators in the expo later in here. But I think this is a positive indicator that there's a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, and a lot of focus in food waste. And also it's a viable sector that's creating lots of jobs. Again, we have 400 innovators in the database today. And hopefully we'll have even more once we make this public. So if anyone wants to talk about that afterwards too, I'm actually happy to share an embargoed version if you're good at keeping secrets. Would love to have you take a look at it and take it for a little spin. So I'll end here. Would love to chat more with everyone. I think maybe I'll have one quick second for questions. But go on our website, download the roadmap. It's free. You can download it. You can play with the interactive cost curve that we have. And then next week, we'll have our policy mapper and our innovator database on there as well. And happy to chat with people more. Thank you.